Hi there, welcome to Fantasy Hub. I'm Mia, your storyteller. Today's story is filled with heartache, discovery, and a twist you won't see coming. So let's begin.
Let me paint you a picture. There I was, Olivia Chen, executive chef of the Royal Neptune, the kind of cruise ship where caviar was a Tuesday appetizer and five-star reviews were just another day at the office. 10 years I'd been perfecting my craft in those floating kitchens, orchestrating culinary symphonies for thousands of passengers who'd never know my name. I had it all figured out: precision, timing, control. My knife cuts were measured to the millimeter, my sauces never broke, and my soufflés never fell. But you know what they say about the best laid plans? The soap-making workshop wasn't even my idea. My sous chef Marcus had practically dragged me there during our shore leave in Barbados. You need a hobby that doesn't involve a blowtorch, he'd said, which was rich coming from a guy whose idea of relaxation was speed reading cookbooks. The studio was this little slice of bohemian paradise tucked between a surf shop and a place that sold way too many tie-dyed sarongs. Essential oils perfumed the air, and sunlight streamed through windows that probably hadn't been cleaned since the Clinton administration. It should have been my personal hell, all that creative chaos. The instructor with her flowing skirts and tendency to say, "Follow your bliss," every 30 seconds. But then I saw her. Courtney Wild, and yes, that was her real name, though half the internet was convinced it was made up for her show. She was leaning against a workbench like she owned the place, golden hair catching the light, wearing what I'd later learn was her signature look. Designer jeans that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, a vintage band t-shirt that was artfully distressed, and an apron that somehow looked glamorous instead of practical. I knew who she was, of course. Cooking with Courtney had been appointment television for the past 3 years. She was America's sweetheart chef, all dimples and enthusiasm, the kind of person who could make scrambled eggs look like a religious experience. The network loved her because she was relatable yet aspirational, the girl next door who happened to live in a $1 million kitchen. What I didn't expect was the way she looked at me when I walked in, like she was seeing something interesting for the first time in months. The workshop tables were cluttered with molds, essential oils, bottles of colorants that looked like they belonged in a mad scientist's laboratory. The instructor, Moonbeam or Stardust, or whatever her crystal-powered name was, had us paired up randomly. Or so I thought, until Courtney slid into the seat next to me with a smile that could have powered the entire island. "Please tell me you're not going to make me look bad at this," she said, her voice carrying that slight rasp that made her television laugh so distinctive. I had perfected the art of keeping cool under pressure. You don't survive a decade in professional kitchens without developing nerves of steel. But Courtney's fingers brushing mine as we reached for the same bottle of bergamot oil. That made me burn. Chef's hands shouldn't be this shaky, she teased. And there was something in her tone that suggested she wasn't just talking about soap making. My retort was automatic, years of kitchen banter kicking in. TV stars shouldn't be this distracting. A beep. Her smirk widened, and I caught a glimpse of something sharper behind those camera-ready dimples. "Who said I was trying to distract you?" Before I could formulate a response that wouldn't get me in trouble, the instructor's voice cut through the tension like a butter knife through warm bread. "Partners, share your molds." And just like that, I was elbow deep in coconut milk soap, based with a woman who smelled like vanilla trouble and looked at me like I was the most fascinating ingredient she'd ever worked with. The thing about Courtney that the cameras never quite captured was how completely present she became when she was interested in something. On screen, she had this practiced enthusiasm, all bright eyes and animated gestures. But working beside her, watching her hands move with surprising grace as she stirred our soap mixture, I saw something different. Focus, real curiosity. The kind of attention that made you want to be worthy of it. You're not what I expected, she said as we waited for our first batch to set. What did you expect? I don't know. Cruise ship chef, I figured you'd be all efficiency and no soul. Like those corporate kitchens where everything comes pre-portioned and creativity goes to die. I laughed, surprising myself. You clearly haven't been on the right cruise ships. Oh, I don't do cruises. Too structured. Too many schedules. She paused, considering. But I'm starting to think I might have been missing out. The double entendre hung between us like steam from a perfectly seared pan. I was saved from having to respond by the lights flickering once, twice, then going out completely. Storms rolling in, someone called out from across the room. Through the windows I could see palm trees beginning to bend under wind that had appeared from nowhere, the way it does in the tropics. Well, this is atmospheric, Courtney murmured, and I could hear the smile in her voice even in the darkness. The instructor who'd introduced herself as Serenity, because of course she had lit a few candles and announced we'd have to wait out the power outage. Most of the other workshop participants seemed delighted by this turn of events, pulling out phones to document their authentic Caribbean experience. But Courtney and I found ourselves pressed closer together in the flickering candlelight, our soap molds forgotten on the table between us. So, she said, her voice lower now, more intimate. Tell me something the cameras don't know about cruise. Ship cooking. I could have told her about the industrial scale logistics, the way we prepared meals for 3,000 people with the precision of a military operation. I could have mentioned the odd hours, the international crew, the way you learned to cook in languages you didn't speak. Instead, I heard myself saying, it gets lonely. You're surrounded by people all day, every day, but you're always behind the scenes, always serving other people's moments. She was quiet for a long moment, long enough that I worried I'd said, too much. Then I know exactly what you mean. Really? Miss America's Sweetheart knows about loneliness. Miss America's Sweetheart is a character I play for 42 minutes a week, plus commercial breaks. The rest of the time, I'm just a person who burns grilled cheese when the cameras aren't rolling. The admission surprised me. Not because celebrities didn't have private struggles. I wasn't that naive, but because she shared it with me. A stranger in a soap-making class during a power outage in Barbados. The network wants to expand my brand, she continued. More shows, maybe a cruise ship special. Something about bringing fine dining to the high seas. And you're not interested? I'm interested in a lot of things. Her hand found mine in the darkness, fingers tracing over knuckles that bore the scars of 1,000 kitchen mishaps. But I'm getting tired of doing them alone. The power came back on then, flooding the room with fluorescent light that made us both blink and pull apart. But something had shifted in that pocket of darkness, some understanding that went deeper than soap recipes and television contracts. When we unmolded our soap an hour later, it was perfect creamy white with swirls of lavender. The bergamot oil we'd both reached for creating a scent that was somehow both calming and energizing. Beginner's luck, I said, but Courtney shook her head. Chemistry, she corrected, and the way she looked at me left no doubt we weren't talking about saponification anymore. 3 weeks later, I was standing in my cruise ship cabin, staring at a contract that would change everything. Courtney's people had moved fast, apparently. When America's Sweetheart wanted something, networks paid attention. Cooking with Courtney, High Seas Edition, would be a 6-episode special featuring authentic cruise cuisine elevated by award-winning techniques, which was a fancy way of saying they wanted me to teach Courtney how to cook for thousands while she taught America that cruise food didn't have to mean endless buffets and mystery meat. The money was good, better than good. The kind of money that could set me up for life, maybe let me open that restaurant I'd been dreaming about since culinary school. But that wasn't why I said yes. The first day of filming, I barely recognized her. Gone was the relaxed woman from the soap workshop, replaced by someone who moved with the kind of practiced precision I associated with dinner service. Her smile was brighter, her laugh more carefully modulated, every gesture designed for maximum camera appeal. Chef Chan. She called out as I entered the ship's main galley, arms spread wide like she was greeting an old friend. Ready to show. America, how the magic happens. For a moment, I wondered if I'd imagined the connection in Barbados. Maybe she was just that good at making people feel special, and I'd been another mark in her charm offensive. But then she leaned in as the crew adjusted their lights, her voice dropping to a whisper that was meant only for me. Don't let them change you. What you do here, it's art. I want people to see that. And just like that, I was back under her spell. The cameras captured the highlights, my techniques for scaling recipes to feed thousands, the logistics of maintaining quality when you're cooking at sea, the way different cuisines merged in the international waters of a cruise ship kitchen. Courtney was brilliant on camera, asking exactly the right questions to make me look like the expert. I was while making the audience feel like they were learning alongside her. But it was the moments between takes that I treasured. The way she'd steal a spoon to taste whatever I was preparing, her eyes closing in genuine appreciation. How she'd ask follow-up questions that had nothing to do with the show, just because she was curious. The professional distance I'd maintained for years started to dissolve under her genuine interest in my craft. You know, she said one afternoon as we wrapped filming for the day, I've been thinking about that restaurant idea. What restaurant idea? The one you mentioned during the soap thing. You said you'd been dreaming about it since culinary school. I'd forgotten I'd mentioned that. It's just a fantasy. Opening a restaurant is financial suicide unless you've got serious backing. What if you did have backing? I looked at her carefully. Courtney, what are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that I've been looking for ways to diversify my brand that don't involve more television contracts. And I think what you two taking something people think they know and showing them how extraordinary it can be, that's exactly what the restaurant world needs. You want to invest in a restaurant? I want to partner in a restaurant with you, if you're interested. The conversation that followed stretched late into the night. We started in the galley, moved to my cabin when the cleaning crew arrived, and ended up on the deck under stars that seemed impossibly bright away from city lights. She wanted to create something that combined her platform with my skills, a place that would challenge people's expectations while serving food that made them feel at home. I'm tired of being a character, she admitted as we leaned against the ship's railing. This thing with you, the show, it's the first time in years I felt like myself on camera. Who are you when you're not being Courtney Wild, America's sweetheart? She considered this, head tilted back to catch the ocean breeze. I'm someone who burns grilled cheese. Someone who collects vintage band t-shirts and reads mystery novels and has strong opinions about whether pineapple belongs on pizza. For or against, depends on the pizza. Depends on the pineapple. Depends on who's asking. She turned to face me fully. I'm someone who's been looking for a partner who gets that food is about more than just fuel. It's about connection, memory, love. The way she said that last word made my breath catch. Olivia, she continued, her voice softer now. I know this is crazy. We barely know each other. But I feel like I've been waiting my whole career to find someone who understands what I'm trying to do. And after watching you work, seeing how you care about every single dish that leaves your kitchen, I think maybe you've been waiting too. She wasn't wrong. I'd spent 10 years perfecting my craft in isolation, serving other people's celebrations, while my own life remained carefully controlled and utterly lonely. The engagement I'd broken off 3 years earlier had been with someone who saw my career as a hobby, something I'd give up when it was time to get serious about real life. But Courtney looked at my work like it was art. She understood that. Cooking was my language, that every dish was a story I was trying to tell. Okay, I said. Okay, let's do it. Let's open a restaurant. Her smile could have powered the entire ship. Really? Really. But I have conditions. Name them. We do this right. No publicity stunts, no gimmicks, just good food and honest service. Deal. And the name. It can't be something like Courtney's Kitchen or Celebrity Chef Cafe. What did you have in mind? I hadn't actually, but standing there under the stars with her, something came to me. Naked Apron. She laughed, a real laugh that had nothing to do with cameras or audiences. Naked Apron? Think about it. When you're really cooking, really creating, you strip away all the pretense. No hiding behind fancy equipment or complicated techniques. Just you and the ingredients and the story you're trying to tell. I love it. She paused, though it might give people the wrong idea, or exactly the right idea. The moment stretched. Between us, full of possibility and promise. I thought she might kiss me then, and I found myself hoping she would. But instead, she reached for my hand, threading our fingers together with the same careful attention she brought to everything else. Partners, she said. Partners, I agreed. But even as I said it, I knew we were talking about more than just business. The restaurant planning consumed the next 6 months. We found a space in Charleston, a historic building with exposed brick walls and windows that faced the harbor. The kitchen was compact but efficient, designed for a small team that could execute at the highest level. The dining room seated 48 people, intimate enough that every guest felt special, but large enough to make the numbers work. We hired Marcus as our sous chef, along with 2 other cooks I'd worked with over the years. Courtney brought in a sommelier she'd worked with on various television projects, someone who understood that wine should complement food rather than compete with it. The concept was simple, a 7-course tasting menu that changed monthly, featuring ingredients from local farms and fishermen, prepared with techniques that elevated familiar flavors into something extraordinary. No molecular gastronomy, no foam, no gold leaf, just honest cooking that told a story about place and season and the people who grew, caught, and prepared the food. But it was more than just a restaurant we were building. Somewhere between paint, samples, and permit applications, between late-night menu planning and early morning farmers market visits, Courtney and I had become something I didn't quite have words for. We weren't dating, exactly. We were too busy for traditional romance, too focused on our shared dream to define what was happening between us. But there were moments, her hand on my shoulder as she leaned over to taste a sauce, the way she'd appear in the kitchen with coffee exactly how I liked it, the texts she'd send at midnight when she couldn't sleep, sharing random thoughts about flavor combinations or restaurant design. The night everything changed was 3 weeks before our scheduled opening. We'd been working 16-hour days, every detail requiring decisions that felt simultaneously crucial and impossible. The stress was getting to everyone, including me. I was in the kitchen, alone, working on a dessert course that had been giving me trouble for weeks. Lavender panna cotta with honey tulle and candied lemon simple in concept, but the balance was eluding me. Too much lavender and it tasted like soap. Too little and it was just vanilla cream with delusions of grandeur. You know, you're not actually required to achieve perfection before we open, right? Courtney's voice came from behind me, warm with affection and exhaustion. I hadn't heard her come in. It's not ready. It's beautiful. Beautiful isn't enough. It needs to be perfect. I know. She moved closer, studying my work with the same attention she'd given everything about the restaurant. What if perfect? Isn't the point? Perfect is always the point, is it? Or is the point to create something that makes people feel something? I turned to face her, frustrated by the dessert and by her question and by the way she could see through all my professional defenses to whatever was underneath. I don't know how to do anything else, I admitted. I don't know how to be anything other than perfect. You don't have to be perfect with me. The words hung between us like a challenge or an invitation. Courtney, I know this is complicated. The restaurant, the partnership, whatever this is between us. But I need you to know that I'm not here because of your cooking. I mean, I am. Your cooking is incredible, but that's not why I can't stop thinking about you. My heart was beating so hard I was sure she could hear it over the hum of the refrigeration units. Why can't you stop thinking about me? Because you see me. Not the television version, not the brand, not the persona I've built my career on. You see me. And when you look at me like you're looking at me right now, I feel like maybe I'm worth seeing. I set down the spoon I'd been holding, my hand shaking in a way that had nothing to do with professional nerves. Courtney, she stepped closer, close enough that I could smell her perfume underneath the kitchen scents of herbs and garlic and stock that never quite washed out of our clothes. Tell me to stop, she whispered. Tell me this is just business and I'll step back. We can be partners and nothing else, and I'll never mention this again, but I couldn't tell her to stop. I'd been stopping myself for months, maintaining professional boundaries that felt increasingly artificial. I'd been perfect for so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to want something just for myself. Instead of stopping her, I closed the distance between us. The first kiss was tentative, a question asked with lips and tongue. The second was an answer, desperate and hungry, and months in the making. By the third, we'd forgotten where we were. Forgotten the dessert that still needed perfecting. Forgotten everything except the way she felt in my arms and the soft sounds she made when I kissed her throat. God, Olivia, she breathed against my ear, and hearing my name in her voice like that, not chef, not partner. Just Olivia undid something in me I hadn't realized was still wound tight. My hands found the hem of her shirt, fingers tracing the soft skin of her waist. She arched into the touch, her own hands fisting in my chef's coat, pulling me closer until there was no space left between us. I started to say, some rational part of my brain noting that we were in the restaurant kitchen, that anyone could walk in, that this was probably a terrible idea for a dozen professional reasons. Should what? She challenged, her teeth grazing my jawline in a way that made coherent thought nearly impossible. Go somewhere else. Where did you have in mind? I didn't have an answer for that. My apartment was 20 minutes away. Her hotel was downtown. The restaurant office was just a cramped space with a desk and filing cabinets. The storage room, I said, which was possibly the least romantic suggestion in the history of seduction. But Courtney laughed a real laugh, not her television laugh, and grabbed my hand. The storage room was exactly what it sounded like. Shelves lined with industrial-sized containers of flour and sugar, boxes of specialty ingredients, the overflow of equipment we hadn't found homes for yet. But it had a lock on the door and no windows, and when Courtney pressed me against the shelving unit and kissed me like she'd been thinking about it for months, I stopped caring about the setting. Her hands were everywhere, tangling in my hair, tracing the line of my collarbone, working at the buttons of my chef's coat with fingers that shook slightly. I returned the favor, mapping the geography of her body through the thin cotton of her tie-shirt, discovering that she was exactly as soft as I'd imagined and twice as responsive. I've wanted this, she whispered against my neck, since that stupid soap workshop. Since you told me TV stars shouldn't be distracting and looked at me like you wanted to prove exactly how distracting I could be. You were distracting, I managed, my voice rough with want. You were distracting. Good, she said, and then proceeded to be even more distracting as her hands found the clasp of my bra beneath my shirt. What happened next was urgent and desperate, and absolutely perfect in its imperfection. We were too eager, too hungry for each other to be graceful about it. Clothes got twisted. Someone knocked over a container of peppercorns that scattered across the floor with tiny pinging sounds. And I was fairly sure I was going to have a bruise on my shoulder blade from the shelf behind me. But it was real in a way that nothing had been for months. Real in a way that made me understand why people wrote songs about this, started wars over it, risked everything for the chance to feel this connected to another person. Afterward, we sat on the floor of the storage room, backs against the shelving, clothes rumpled and hair thoroughly messed. Courtney's head was on my shoulder, her breathing slowly returning to normal. "So," she said eventually, "that happened." "That happened," I agreed. "Any regrets?" I considered the question seriously. In a few hours, we'd have to go back to being business partners. We had a restaurant opening in 3 weeks, staff to manage, critics to impress, investors to satisfy. Getting involved with each other complicated everything in ways I couldn't even begin to calculate. "None," I said, and meant it. She lifted her head to look at me, her hair falling across her face in a way that made me want to brush it back, so I did. "What does this mean?" she asked. "For us, I mean." "For the restaurant, I don't know," I admitted. "I've never mixed business with pleasure before." "Well, you're in luck, because I have extensive experience mixing business with pleasure. It's basically my entire career." "And how does that usually work out?" "Terribly," she said cheerfully, "but I have a good feeling about this one." 3 weeks later, Naked Apron opened to a full house and a review in the Charleston Post and Courier that called it a revelation. The critic, a notoriously difficult woman who closed 3 restaurants with devastating reviews, wrote that our food transcended the celebrity chef phenomenon to achieve something rarer, genuine hospitality married to technical excellence. The success should have been everything I dreamed of. The reservation book was full for the next 2 months. Food bloggers were making pilgrimages from Atlanta and Nashville. There was talk of James Beard nominations, magazine features, expansion, opportunities. But the best part of every service was the moment when Courtney would catch my eye across the dining room and smile, not her television smile, but the private one that was just for me. We'd managed to keep our relationship out of the press, though it required some creative scheduling and the kind of discretion that felt thrilling and exhausting in equal measure. As far as the public knew, we were business partners who'd met during the filming of her cruise ship special and discovered a shared vision for hospitality. The truth was more complicated and infinitely more satisfying. We'd fallen into a rhythm that worked for both the restaurant and for us. Days were professional. She handled front of house and media while I ran the kitchen. But evenings, after the last customer had been served and the staff had gone home, belonged to us. Sometimes we'd cook together, experimenting with new dishes, or just making something simple for ourselves. Other times we'd sit in the dining room with a bottle of wine, talking about everything except the restaurant. I learned that she collected vintage postcards, that she'd wanted to be a veterinarian before she discovered cooking, that she had a scar on her ankle from a childhood accident involving a bicycle and her older brother's dog. She learned that I'd grown up in my grandmother's restaurant in San Francisco's Chinatown, that I'd been engaged to someone who'd never understood why I worked such long hours, that I had dreams of traveling through Southeast Asia to study the street food that had influenced my grandmother's cooking. "We should do that," she said one night as we shared a dessert I'd been perfecting, the lavender panna cotta that had finally achieved the balance I'd been chasing. "Do what? Travel?" "Take a month off and eat our way through Vietnam and Thailand. And Cambodia. The restaurant will survive a month without us. Marcus is perfectly capable of running the kitchen, and my assistant can handle the business side." "You want to do that? Take a month away from your career?" She reached across the table and took my hand, thumb tracing over my knuckles in a gesture that had become familiar and precious. Olivia, you are my career now. This restaurant, what? We've built together, it's not a side project or a brand expansion. It's the most important thing I've ever done. Because of the food, because of you. The words hung in the air between us, weighted with meaning that went beyond business partnerships and shared dreams. We'd been dancing around the deeper implications of what we'd started for months, content to exist in the space between friendship and something more permanent. I love you, she said, simple and direct in a way that took my breath away. I'd known it, of course. Had felt it in the way she looked at me across the kitchen, in the careful attention she paid to my opinions about everything from menu design to wine pairings. Had seen it in the way she'd rearrange her schedule to spend time with me, in the small, thoughtful gestures that had nothing to do with the restaurant and everything to do with who I was as a person. But hearing her say it made it real in a way that all the stolen moments and careful discretion couldn't. I love you too, I said, and watched her face transform with the kind of joy that made me understand why people wrote poetry. 1 year after opening, Naked Apron had become exactly what we dreamed it would be. The James Beard nomination had materialized, along with features in food and wine and Bon Appetit. We'd been invited to cook at the Charleston Food and Wine Festival, and there was talk of a cookbook deal. More importantly, we'd proven that a restaurant could be both critically acclaimed and financially successful without compromising the values. That had brought us together. Our staff was happy, our customers were loyal, and our relationship had evolved into something that felt both passionate and sustainable, which is why I should have seen the proposal coming. The occasion was our first anniversary celebration, a special dinner for invited guests, food writers, and local dignitaries. Courtney had arranged for a film crew to document the evening, ostensibly for a retrospective piece about the restaurant's first year. I should have been suspicious when she insisted on making a speech before the final course was served. Courtney was comfortable in front of cameras, but she usually preferred to let the food speak for itself during restaurant events. I definitely should have been suspicious when she called me out of the kitchen to stand beside her as she addressed the dining room. A year ago, she began, her voice carrying easily through the space we'd designed together. I had a television show, a brand, and what most people would consider a successful career. But I didn't have a partner. I didn't have someone who challenged me to be better, who saw potential in ideas I was afraid to voice, who could turn simple ingredients into something that felt like magic. She paused, looking directly at me with an expression that was suddenly terrifyingly serious. Olivia Chen changed my life in ways that have nothing to do with restaurants or television or any of the professional reasons we're supposed to be here tonight. My heart started beating faster, a combination of dread and anticipation that reminded me of the moment before tasting a new dish, not knowing if it would be brilliant or disastrous. She taught me that the best partnerships aren't about dividing responsibilities or maximizing efficiency. They're about finding someone who makes you want to be worthy of their trust. And then she was on one knee, pulling a small velvet box from her pocket while I stood frozen in front of 48 dinner guests, 3 food writers, and a television crew that was definitely not there for a retrospective piece. Olivia, she said, her voice shaking for the first time in her career, will you marry me? And not for the ratings. The dining room had gone completely silent except for the soft whir of camera equipment and what sounded like someone crying at table. 6. I looked down at Courtney, kneeling in the restaurant we'd built together, surrounded by the life we'd created, asking me to make it permanent in front of God, Gordon Ramsay, who was apparently in town for the festival, and 2.7 million viewers. Who would eventually watch this moment on television? My first instinct was panic. We'd worked so hard to keep our relationship private, to be taken seriously as business partners and restaurateurs rather than celebrity gossip fodder. This proposal would change everything, make us public in ways we'd carefully avoided. My second instinct was to look at the ring, which was perfect to simple solitaire that would never get in the way while cooking, elegant enough for front of house duties, classic enough that I'd still love it in 50 years. My third instinct was to realize that none of the publicity concerns mattered. What mattered was the woman kneeling in front of me, who'd changed the entire trajectory of my life, who'd seen potential in dreams I'd been afraid to voice, who'd made me understand that perfection wasn't about control, it was about finding someone worth being imperfect with. Instead of answering with words, I yanked her up by her collar and kissed her stupid in front of everyone. The room erupted in cheers and applause. Someone started crying harder, definitely table 6, which I now realized was entirely composed. Of Courtney's family members who'd somehow kept this secret, the cameras kept rolling, capturing what would become one of the most watched proposal videos in internet history. When we finally broke apart, Courtney was grinning and crying simultaneously, mascara slightly smudged in a way that made her look more beautiful than any professional makeup job. "Is that a yes?" she asked. "That's a yes," I confirmed and let her slide the ring onto my finger while 48 people cheered, and I tried to process the fact that I was engaged, in love, and apparently about to become a much more public person than I'd ever intended. Later, after the last guest had left and the staff had finished cleaning, we sat in our empty restaurant sharing a bottle of champagne and processing what had just happened. "So," I said, studying the ring that caught the light from the candles, "we'd forgotten to blow out. That was subtle. I thought you'd appreciate the theatrical element. I appreciate that you didn't warn me. I would have overthought it and probably talked myself out of saying yes." "Would you have? Talked yourself out of it?" I considered the question seriously. A year ago, the idea of mixing my professional life with romance would have terrified me. I'd spent so many years maintaining control, keeping my personal and professional identities separate, protecting myself from the kind of vulnerability that came with letting someone see all your imperfections. But Courtney had seen me burn sauces and serve dishes I wasn't completely satisfied with. She'd seen me stressed and exhausted and occasionally unreasonable during the worst of the opening preparations. She'd seen me without makeup, covered in flour and arguing with vendors over the quality of their produce, and she'd proposed anyway. "No," I said finally. "I wouldn't have talked myself out of it, but I'm glad you didn't give me the chance." "Good," she said, leaning over to kiss me softly, "because I've been carrying that ring around for 3 months, waiting for the perfect moment." 3 months? I bought it right after the Beard nomination was announced. I realized that none of the professional success mattered if I couldn't share it with you. And you decided that the perfect moment was in front of a television crew. I decided the perfect moment was surrounded by everything we'd built together. The restaurant, the staff, the customers who've become regulars, the critics who've taken us seriously. I wanted our proposal to happen in the middle of our life, not separate from it. She was right, of course. The proposal had been perfect precisely because it hadn't been private or traditionally romantic. It had been public and professional and completely authentic to who we were as a couple and as partners. Besides, she continued, grinning now, "we'll never forget our anniversary." As if I could forget the anniversary of the day my life completely changed. Which day was that? The day we met? The day we opened the restaurant? The day we first kissed in the storage room? "All of them," I said. "Every single day since I walked into that soap-making workshop and met a woman who looked at me like I was worth knowing."